Hello, you're very welcome to this brief guide on how to use the outputs of the BIC for SME project. This project has been co-funded by the Erasmus Plus programme of the European Union. Small and micro enterprises supply over 1/3 of the workforce in the European Union and also contribute to over 20% of the economic added value in the Union. The BIC for SME project seeks to build the innovation competencies of these businesses to help the enterprises and entrepreneurs to improve their knowledge, skills, and competencies in key business areas, thereby helping them to be more effective and efficient in the work that they do. It also sets out to support trainers, mentors, and coaches who provide support to these organizations. The partners of the BIC for SME project have delivered an offering to support small and micro enterprises and the professionals who support them by developing tools to boost their innovation capacity. We have developed an offering around 10 business modules, including tools and materials which cover creating ideas, creating a business, adding value through innovation, managing the human aspect of your business, staying on the right side of the law, connecting with your audience and growing your sales, getting the money to start, grow, and sustain your business, using technology to help your business, connecting with people and making them work for you, going international, and finally, how is my business doing? Here's how you can use the tools that we have developed as part of the BIC for SME project. First, you go to the BIC for SME website online, which is at www.bicforsme.eu. Here you see the homepage for the BIC for SME project. And the first step when using the tools and training materials we have developed is to go to the work tab entitled Training for SMEs. Here, once you scroll down, you will see the titles of the 10 modules that have been developed. Let's look at module number 6, which is entitled Getting Money to Start, Grow, and Sustain Your Business. Here, you see a number of links which correspond to the tools and materials that have been developed. The first step is to go to the diagnostic test. Here you see the diagnostic tool as it will appear on screen. The first area is the step-by-step guide, which you can click on to give you a quick overview of how to use the diagnostic tool and materials. The first step in using the diagnostic tool helps you to assess the level of knowledge of the entrepreneur in relation to any of the 10 modules that were outlined earlier. Once you know what the entrepreneur knows or does not know, then you can determine the training to be undertaken. The concept map shown here, which we will look at again later, gives information on key areas of the business in terms of funding. It looks at funding needs, pricing and costing, sources of funds, financial projections, business and revenue model, and how to effectively communicate with key stakeholders. It then tells you how to set out an objective for the interaction with the entrepreneur. It tells you how to develop a roadmap, an action plan, and how to follow up on this. And it gives you instructions in terms of how to determine the satisfactory outputs of the intervention. The next step is to move on to the entrepreneur's work tab. Here, there are a number of key areas that we address. In terms of the financial module, we look at funding gaps, assessing funding requirements, sources of funds, business and revenue model, income and expenditure, cash flow, etc. And these are assessed under 3 key headings, which are financial requirements and sources of funds, financial modelling, risk analysis, and financial management. And the format of all 10 modules is similar. The yellow text boxes give you guidance on how to use the tools. In this section, we ask specific questions of the entrepreneur. Does the entrepreneur know how much money is required to develop and grow this business, for example? Do they know what funding is required and what it's required for? Have they considered different sources of finance? Have they developed a cash flow, P&L account and balance sheet? Can they effectively communicate with key stakeholders? We ask these questions of the entrepreneur, and we then rank them in terms of their level of knowledge. -3 in this instance means that they have a very low level of knowledge of this topic, whereas +3 indicates they have a good understanding. Depending on the score, they will then get a traffic light indication of their level of knowledge. Red means they are significantly deficient in their knowledge and must do significant work. Amber means they have some of the knowledge required but must do more. Green indicates they have a satisfactory level of knowledge and can progress to the next section. In addition to the traffic light system, we also have a graphic which represents the learning gaps or otherwise. To the left of the center point are weak areas, to the right are areas of strength. Further down, we have additional information. A drop-down box allows us to assess how many people are employed in the business. It allows us to identify what stage or what area of the life cycle the business is at. It allows us to identify the area of business they're in and the type of revenue model or route to market that they're undertaking. Furthermore, we can put additional information here in this section, which help us get a better picture of the level of knowledge of the entrepreneur. And finally, at the bottom, we can weight those areas which we feel are important to a greater or lesser extent when dealing with the entrepreneur. In this instance, we have weighted all sections as being of relative importance. Depending on the ranking that you give to these 3 areas here, then the outcomes will change. So, for example, we see here the layout in terms of the outcomes of the assessment. The top ones, the entrepreneur needs to do significant work. The other areas, the entrepreneur is relatively capable. Let's change the weighting. Let's see how this has altered our findings. Whereas these were red initially, they're now amber, and whereas these were a combination of green and amber, we now see they're a combination of green and red. Having this information, we then go to the roadmap section. And we can summarize the outcomes for the entrepreneur. Here, for example, this area is red. The entrepreneur needs to do significant work. We are suggesting that they research the most suitable business model for this project. You can put in as much or as little information as you need, and you can print off this section and you can present it to the entrepreneur as a takeaway, or you can email it to them as an action item to follow up on after your initial meeting. You can also demonstrate to them here where the work they need to do fits in the overall context of financing their business. Here, for example, in the blue, it's work that needs to be done on the financial projections. Perhaps they need to identify more information in terms of sources of funds. Here, they can consider things like family, friends, and fools, their own funds, grant aid, private or angel investors, etc. We can then create an outline training module for them. What sections of the training material they should review and the titles of those modules. We can also identify what format the learning should take. Here, for example, we see their options, which are frontal lessons or face-to-face learning. We see there is peer learning or case studies. We see there are discussion forums, for example. We can change the weighting depending on our preferred method of learning. And that will help us define a learning plan. Furthermore, we can assess where the entrepreneur is at in terms of their level of knowledge. Do they understand the topic relatively well? 1 is no, they do not, whereas 6, they have a good level of understanding. We can change this as we see fit. We can also ask questions in terms of whether they can work on what has been discussed with them, whether they believe the learning can support their business, and whether they believe they can implement it in the business immediately. Again, the yellow text boxes provide guidance in terms of how to use the tool. We can also use this tool after the initial meeting for follow-up meetings, and we can change the goals for the entrepreneur depending on their progression. In addition to the entrepreneurs, we are also providing an offering to trainers, mentors, and coaches of entrepreneurs and early stage businesses. Similar to the entrepreneurs, a trainer can assess their own level of knowledge of a subject. This may be important where a trainer, mentor, or coach is starting out in their career, and this tool may provide them with a structure that they would find useful when engaging with their clients. For other more established trainers, it might help them better structure their offering. For some trainers or coaches who are specialists in certain areas, it may help them to expand their level of knowledge on other areas. To use the tool, therefore, for trainers, what they can do is go to the section on trainers at the bottom, the work tab here, and they can ask themselves the same questions that have been asked of the entrepreneur. For example, do I know how to assess the funding gap for a business? Do I know about the capital requirements of a typical startup business? Do I know what sources of funds are required to match the needs of the business at the various stages of the business life cycle? It's important to note that these questions, and also the questions in the Entrepreneur's Work tab, can be edited depending on given circumstances or regional requirements. So here, for example, the trainer can change these questions if they feel they're more appropriate in some other way. Again, they can rank themselves in terms of what they know or what they don't know. It's also provided by way of a graphic. And further down, we also have additional information that they can ask about themselves or information they feel they need to find out. They can also provide a weighting structure. As with the entrepreneur, the trainer can summarize their own level of knowledge or otherwise, and specific tasks or goals that they must undertake to address any knowledge deficit. For example, here, what are typical startup costs? And like the entrepreneur, trainer can decide what they need to know in terms of the overall funding landscape using the concept map, what training they will undertake, how they will undertake the training, and they can then develop their own KPIs or planned outcomes. After you have completed the diagnostic, you can then go to the concept map, which we've looked at briefly earlier on. By clicking on the concept map, we can get an overall picture of finance as how it relates to the business. If we increase the magnification of the screen, we can see it looks at issues such as sources of funds, family, friends and fools, promoters' own funds, grant aid, private monies, VC funds, accelerator programs, competitions, bursaries, banks, impact funds, crowdfunding, etc. Please note, these are not an exhaustive list of funding options, but they provide a good overview of the funding options that are available. We also consider things like financial projections and the detail that goes into them. In green here, we see how important it is to effectively communicate with key stakeholders. Here, we look at the business revenue model. And we also consider funding needs, whether operating or capital costs, and an example of the types of costs that will appear under each. After using the concept map, you can then go and look at the training materials by clicking on this link. This will bring you to material which is common in terms of its presentation for all of the modules. Here again, we look at the financial module. The first part is a general introduction with some questions for entrepreneurs or trainers in terms of starting up a business. It also highlights some common tools that are used in terms of business research and assessing environmental issues. It then moves on to section 2, which gives an outline of how the module is structured. It tells you about the module goals, how a training process or a training program can be laid out, And it tells you then specifically about each module and how long you should expect to work on that. Section 3 then goes in specifically to each element of the materials. Based on the diagnostic that has been undertaken earlier, you'll decide where you are weak or strong, or where the entrepreneur is weak or strong, and you can direct them to the material most appropriate for their needs. We have internal links in the learning material which will take you directly to the topic which is directly of interest to you. Let's go here to understanding risk analysis and financial management. So we're brought immediately to the section. Again, there are questions which help an entrepreneur assess their situation. And we progress then to useful tools. For example, in this instance, communicating with stakeholders. This gives you 10 key points to include in any PowerPoint presentation for potential stakeholders and potential investors. Further along, we give information on the structure of a one-page business plan, how to use it, why to use it, when to use it, and how it looks in practice. At the end of each training section, there are some useful materials and links. There are some appendices, key terms, case studies, good practices and exercises, and some self-test questions. The remaining sections are then around roadmap and action plan. And as mentioned earlier, the format is similar for all of the modules. Here, the roadmap and action plan sets out some key things that the entrepreneur should achieve after having gone through the training process. It identifies who should carry out the activity, when it should be done, and how it should be done. And where these actions don't succeed, there are countermeasures proposed. So these are alternative ways of achieving the desired goals. The final section then is on follow-up and outputs. And this tells you what has actually been achieved in relation to the original objectives that were set out. And where relevant, we then have some appendices. For example, in relation to this finance module, we have an example of an Excel template that can be used to help the business develop a financial plan for their project. Here we have a simple cash flow, profit and loss, and balance sheet model that an entrepreneur can use to set out their financial projections for their business. The yellow text boxes give simple guidance on how to use the template. So this includes the introduction to the BIC for SME tools and material. It's important to note that these tools and materials can be edited by entrepreneurs, trainers, coaches, etc., in a way that is most appropriate to their given situation. For example, the diagnostic tool questions can be edited by trainers, mentors, and coaches to be more reflective of their own situation. And likewise, the training material can be edited in a way that you can use all of the material, you can supplement it with your own information, or you can extract those elements that are most of interest to you. We hope you find it useful. Thank you.